procedures to endure here in committee.
Yes, we have the pension governance item.
I want to see what the committee wants to do. We have yet to hear the first quarter finance report, and we have to take up where we left off with unfinished pension discussion that was spilled over from last time. What's the committee's pleasure? Pension.
Finance is more than willing to email out the report and provide color and context to any FEC member that would like it. So, and if they need a personal briefing from Ms. Carr, Mr. Gaffney, or myself, just request it, and we'll do that in order to save time for this body.
That's outstanding. So let's go back to the pension paper. 1589. This is an ordinance by members Martin and Shook, as substituted by Finance Exec, to amend the governance of the City of Atlanta General Employees Pension Plan, Police Officers Pension Plan, and Firefighter Pension Plan to consolidate and restructure their respective boards of trustees without changing employee pension contributions or retirement benefits for the purpose of incorporating industry best practices and enhancing investment returns and for other purposes. Now, a number of people signed up today to speak. I'm very aware that we cut off 3 people who were waiting last time, one of whom I see here in the person of Ms. Pagnotta. I know the administration has some additional information that they developed in response to some of the questions and concerns that were raised, and so we'll need to look at that. So personally, I'd like to go back and start where we left off by offering opportunities to speak to the 3 people that got cut off last time, and then we'll go to today's list. Ms. Pagnotta, did you want to first see the updated Finance Department material, or did you want to speak now? It's your choice.
I'll speak now because I've read it. I've a copy of it, and I read it, and it hasn't changed my viewpoint.
Okay. Well, come on up. And Lieutenant Gertis was also one that got cut off. Is he here? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Pagnotta.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity, Finance Exec Committee. My name is Gina Pagnotta Murphy. I am president of PACE. Although I am a participant of the current DB pension plan, I'm also a trustee on the General Employees Pension Board, as well as the president of PACE Union for Employees. However, today I'm speaking as the president of the PACE Union on behalf of its members and as a plan participant, and not speaking as a representative for the GEPF trustee, the General Employees Pension Fund. I want to make that clear, so I'm making my disclaimer now. So anything I say is not on the board, it's just me.
Thank you.
As I communicated with our membership when this first came out, it was a rapid response that our members, and I'm sure there are other plan participants that agree with us who are not in a union, are not comfortable with the proposed legislation of the pension reform, nor of its alternate legislation proposed by Councilperson Yolanda Adrien. Not only are they uncomfortable, the consensus is that they do not seek for the hierarchy to change. And they had questions as to why now, why so quickly, and why did not the employees have an opportunity to vote on this through a survey? Why can this not be set aside for the future mayor and future council to arbitrate carefully before a decision is to be made? After all, this should be on the next administration to-do list. As I listened last week in the work session of the concerns and statements made by several speakers, it really disturbed me to hear other council persons that were designated on the police and fire pension boards were no-shows at their meetings. I thought that the General Pension Board was the only board where the designated council person was a no-show. I found that not to be true. So that shows me that no council person that has been designated to the 3 pension boards were there, ever, maybe 1 or 2 times. How can it be trusted that this super board trustees will have the same stamina, enthusiasm, dependability, and determination of an elected person by plan participants to show up and make sound decisions? Currently, no trustee, to my knowledge, receives any monetary compensation or stipend to be on the board. It is their duty as an elected trustee to show up and be engaged and discuss pension business. Whereas any legislation governing what type of discipline would be given for lack of cooperation. There is none to my knowledge. The consolidation of the 3 boards is a governance change only, and according to Councilperson Adrian, proposed legislation, it also speaks on having experts on the board so that they can make sound and solid decisions in how we invest and monitor the money. But to my understanding, it is not my job
Yeah.
Mr. Bond, Councilman Bond was on ours, and I think Ms. Bottoms was on one of the police or fire, and who was the other one? I can't speak for it. Cleta Winslow. I think I saw Mr. Bond one time, and that was to vote on something very special that we had needed a vote on, and that was it. I can't speak for any other, with no disrespect to him, but for 2 terms I've been on this board, one and going into the second one, I have not seen him. That really absurds me, and I hear at the last week the other ones didn't show up at their boards either. But to my understanding, it is not my job to invest the pension money. It is my job as an elected official from the employees that trust me and voted for me to assist in choosing good, sound, and credible investors who meet or exceed the benchmark on our investment returns. And for the record, on both pension election, I had the highest votes. As Ms. Adrian, your proposal also states that because the performance of pension investment affects the availability of funds for current operational costs, including salaries, I thought in a previous presentation last week that the administration said that our fiscal status was great and grounded and that we had a balanced budget to be proud of. Now, that's my inference. But as you can remember and recall, in this by Mayor Kasim Reed, he said, according to the document here, since then we have built our cash reserves from $7.4 million to over $175 million today. We have balanced our budget for 8 consecutive years without once turning to a property tax increase. And we have moved our credit rating 8 positions to a AA+, the second highest credit rating that a city can have. And I think hats off goes to that. So therefore, why is it necessary that we need to come up with a super board to help us invest our money, and that you're afraid that we're not making good investments, but we're sound with a balanced budget? As well as I do agree that all new elected pension trustees should have training, and I can go on and agree that we should be certified as well. I lost my place. New elected pension trustees should have the training, and we should be given, and we allow new employees to be hired, just like we do now when we hire employees that come in that need CDLs or need water certification. We allow them to go on city time. We pay for that, as well as we reimburse for those certifications. So that is another idea that we can have for the pension boards. We can regulate and mandate that they be certified. There's always a need for training to learn what is new out there in the market. However, this is something that can be regulated and mandated within its current structure form without having to change the structure to a super board. But we do have the brilliance of a CFO on the board so that he and she can help engage us in the financial world as they see when it's necessary. If they can run the entire city budget, they can surely inform the board of uncanny things that's going on. Is that not expert capability? Transparency, you say that is not there. It is there. We can also incorporate the use of Channel 26 at these meetings, just like we are on TV now at your meetings. That's something that we can look at. And we can also consider looking at lowering the cost of our internal chargebacks that we have that's very high. How do we know that this structure will save money? Has there been a pilot program to see this? Remember when you thought outsourcing our water department was a great thing? What happened to that? Remember when you thought the parking media outsourcing was a great thing? What happened to that? Why are we always trying to follow some other city? And I say this all the time to you. We are the greater city. Atlanta is the greater city. We should be leading and not following some other state that has done something because they didn't do what they needed to do correctly. Would it be wise to slow down? Yes, it will. Would it be wise to take a breath? Yes, it will. and say, let's have a real working session to see how this structure can be adjusted, but to fit the needs of everyone with some minor changes. The changes that are being proposed are major, and it takes time to make the right decision. The working session that was presented to us last week, with due respect to you, Mr. Shook, it was not a working session in my opinion. It was a public speaking session. The last working session I was in regarding the pension reform, it took us about 2 weeks to meet and discuss with all parties, negotiating. And the result was, instead of getting rid of the DB plan, we agreed to save it, but with a 5% increase to employees. The Finance Exec Committee, we owe our employees respect for doing that by allowing more time to figure this out. Not today, not tomorrow, but with good stewardship in making decisions with all parties, not just one side. That's what you're asking for ultimately. In closing, the Blue Ribbon Commission was done in June of 2014. I was on that panel. Some great decisions came out of that commission, but actually on paper, but are they working? Why at the end of 2017, and think about it, from 2014 to 2017, that's almost 3 years later, there is an urgent need to change the structure of our pension boards. I am heartfully requesting that you do not forward this on the full council for a vote to make these changes so abruptly. Please allow more time to investigate this and have a real working session so that all parties can reside once more together to make a sound decision about pension reform as you eloquently put it in your proposed legislation. Make a sound decision. Do not move this forward at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. We left Lieutenant Gertis hanging last time. I don't see him here. So let's go to those, and we're joined by Ms. Felicia Moore. So let's now go to the people who have signed up today, and I'll repeat the comment I made earlier. We're happy to have you speak now, or you have the option of waiting until we all see the information that Finance has developed in response to questions and concerns that came up last time. Do we want to go ahead and let Finance go and then comment? No, Mr. Strachan wants to be recognized, so come on up.
I was just going to say I'd like to make comments before the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, come on, you're next up.
So, esteemed council members and other supporting staff, thanks again for this opportunity to present to you. Again, I'm Doug Strachan. I've been a General Employees Pension Fund trustee since 2010. I've been the chair of GEP for the last 4 years. As a trustee, one of the chief objectives we have is to preserve capital. In that regard, I want to point out the source of millions of dollars in savings over the last 7 years in 3 areas. The first that has to do with how we report investment returns. Prior to 2010, all investment manager reports were submitted gross of fees, made it very difficult for us to really compare net performance of different investments. After inducing the change to net of fees reporting, we were able to easily see underperforming managers and get rid of them. Number 2, in 2010, GEP had no exposure to low-cost, passively managed index funds. GEP undertook modeling of passively managed index funds with the assistance of Georgia State University at no cost to the city or to the pension, and which the study revealed that we were leaving 4.28% return on investment on the table, and at the time on assets of $1 billion, that was $42.8 million. So based on that, the board began to allocate 2 passively managed index funds. Today we're about a third passively managed, and we've reaped millions of dollars in savings. The last area I wanted to highlight, with all due honor to the Honorable Amir Kasim Reed and his courage to undertake pension reform, because we needed it, and without his leadership we wouldn't have had it. But I want to say that the specific flavor of pension reform, where all of the employees came together and agreed to contribute an extra 5%, that generates $20 million a year, and that has in no small measure has contributed significantly to the reserves that we enjoy today. It has to be managed. All respect to those who have managed that, but that's a significant contributor. I think all would agree. The source of that is articulated in the May 2011 minutes, page 5. And when we get to the source, all these three things have in common is the ideas that push these things did not come from highly paid staff. They did not come from highly paid external investment consultants or managers. They all came from the very elected trustees that are at risk of being disenfranchised if this legislation goes through, 17-1589 as written. Now, personally, I've been a long proponent of consolidation if, indeed, it helps to preserve assets, which is our main charge. But I'm not in favor of the flavor as articulated in this proposed legislation. I think this is also forced and it risks alienating a lot of people. And again, it disenfranchises the people that have saved us millions, that are there to save us millions at the potential savings of thousands. That's something to think about because we don't have a bunch of professionals. The boards are not weighted highly with professionals. They're weighted with people who have skin in the game and who are determined not to let one decision blow millions of dollars. So there are probably some savings. I don't know exactly what they are. I don't think the presentation you're going to see, I think the savings are overblown. You're going to still pay actuaries 3 times because you got 3 different plans. You're still going to pay third-party managers 3 times, or you're going to pay them once, but you're going to pay them per volume of employee benefits managed. You'll save some money with investment managers. You won't pay those 3 times anymore. That'll save you maybe $500,000. You'll save some money with lawyers. You won't pay them 3 times. You pay them once. That's maybe $100,000 or $200,000. Maybe $500,000 to $1 million, which is significant, right? But somebody making a decision that's not wise relative to the allocation of a large mandate could blow millions and wipe out all those expected savings. If you do make a change, if you do move forward, there's a process, and I think you have before you a section of code, section 3-507. Was that passed out? Does everybody have that? There are 3 things there. You have the power to make a change, I believe, but there are some steps that I think are in the wisdom of our forefathers who made these ordinances put in place. There has to be, in paragraph A under section 2, an investigation by an independent actuary as evinced by a written report. I'm not sure we have that. It hasn't been shared with me. Anyway, I don't know about other board members. There has to be written communication to board trustees asking them for their non-binding recommendation. I have a copy of that here that I received as chair, which I forwarded all the board members. It's a certified letter. It came from the city. I'm going to read it to you. It's very brief. Dear Chair Strachan and members of the General Employees Pension Fund Board of Trustees, as you were already notified by Commissioner Yvonne Yancey on September 25, 2017, the City of Atlanta Administration has introduced Ordinance 17-1589 to City Council for the purposes of applying best practices to the governance of the city's 3 pension plans. I am requesting that your board review the proposed modification and request your non-binding recommendation in favor or against the proposed modification at your next pension board meeting. That's from our CFO, Mr. Beard. Now, I got this after our last board meeting, certified mail. I think it was about November 8th. So the next board meeting is December. So if you move forward today and recommend that we pass this legislation, and it's passed on Monday, it'll be passed before you ever get what the law requires that you get, a recommendation. So I'm urging you, based on this alone, and there's a little more in here too. It says also the school board has to opine because they'd be affected. But I'm urging you to hold this at least until after the 3 pension boards affected are going to be able to comply with the law and give you a recommendation. I think at the very least, you need to think about this legal issue as well as other legal issues that will potentially be brought up. I'm not an attorney. But what I didn't want to see last time with pension reform is I didn't want to see the city pay lawyers a lot of money and the unions or pension boards pay a lot of money and nobody benefit but the attorneys, with all due respect to all the attorneys in the audience. I mean, we all want the same thing. We want the plan to be governed well. We want it to be a viable and sustainable program. So I'm urging you to hold off until at least these statutes in Section 3507 can be complied with. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
What year? I don't understand 3507 as a reference to OCGA. That's the old code, isn't it? Does anybody know from the law department? It's more digits than that now, you know, to be like. Have you seen what he's passed out?
Yes, Section 3-507 is currently part of the charter.
Part of our charter, so this is not OCGA
No, ma'am.
at all. Okay, great. That was confusing. This is for the city's
It's a
law,
current part of our charter.
but he's not referring to the state law at
No.
all. Okay, that's where I was confused. All right, thanks.
All right, next up is Marla Kreindler.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Marla Kreindler, and I'm with Morgan, Lewis & Bacchius, representing the General Employees Pension Fund. And in addition to what Doug highlighted, just the process that we expect to see followed as set out in 3507 in the city's charter, that the Pension Fund Board has also asked for additional information in support of the conclusions or the findings that are being drawn, and have asked to receive that information. And as well, we've sent and have provided, I believe, to you a couple of letters where we've questioned, the authority to raise this type of ordinance in this manner without it going to General Assembly. And we have received a brief response with deference to the city attorney, citing to a recent Supreme Court case within the past couple of years, the Borders decision. And we look at that decision, and we have questions in terms of how this exact question would be interpreted in light of that decision. And specifically, that decision was based on changes from the prior governance, to increase the contributions. And so the court specifically looked at that. At the same time, the court recognized that an authority to make a change in something such as the pension code is really based on the delegation that's provided by the General Assembly. And so then we have also recognized that there is currently a provision that was passed in the General Assembly that really mirrors what's in the city code, that speaks to the current governance structure and that provides that current governance structure in the form that it is now. And so the question then is does that governance structure then need to be amended by the General Assembly? And the question of governance is something that came up in another case, an appellate court decision in 2005. And in that decision, there was a reference to this specific provision of the General Assembly law, which dates back to the 1980s and predates constitutional changes since then. And that law was referred to as good law. It was cited in that decision from 2005 as good law. And so then the question that we're presented with is in this case, when we're dealing with a change in the governance structure, which is different from a change in the benefit structure, and where we have a provision in the state law that specifically sets out that governance structure, can it be changed without being subject to challenge in court, such as, as some kind of temporary restraining order or something to enjoin it, subject to legislation being passed by the General Assembly to repeal or change what is currently state law.
Okay. Thank you. Next is Garfield Pert. Garfield Pert. Okay. Demetra Weidman. Mark.
Both of those have to do with thanks again, and you guys already voted on it.
Thank you. Tracy Gate. Is it? Jennifer Smash. Ken Allen. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wanted to be heard? All right. Let's then go to let's take a look then at what the Finance Department developed in response to comments made last time. I would ask that to the extent possible that previously shown slides get skipped over and let's just look at the new data or the modified slides.
Fair enough, sir.
Okay.
So I wanted to start at slide 2. Very next slide. So it's been said that this is all of a sudden it popped up. Remember the Blue Ribbon Commission reports, it was in 2014, and this was on the list of recommendations. It did not get acted upon then. So we went through and did some of the hard lifts. Now we're going back to take these efforts to change the governance structure to a world-class structure that helps maintain fiscal stability. So I don't, this notion of that it's new or it just popped up, I wanted to push back slightly. So in this slide, what I wanted to kind of go over quickly again is to talk about what we're doing to increase value. So there's the value proposition is really twofold. The savings on the administrative and investment management cost, as on the other side, improved returns from bringing professional expertise to the table. And then all that wrapped around this notion of transparency, putting the meetings out in a public environment so people can see it. So my dad told me, a wise man's tools are analogies or riddles. If there are 3 houses sitting next to each other and each one has a different yard guy and each guy has a different painter and each one has a different electrician, there may be some cost savings to say, hey, why don't we get together and cut all the grass together? Why don't we get together and paint together? What we have here is a situation where these 3 desperate boards have 3 different law firms, 2 actuaries, 3 different investment consultants, and it would just seem to make sense to talk about how about having 1 professional each and move forward in that direction. On the other side, why not bring forward somebody who's, and I appreciate Mr. Strachan's comment that as the CFO of the city, I do have the level of financial acumen, but I'm not the investment professional, chief investment officer that would do this every day. How about bring the level of competence up with training, et cetera, and put more staff behind the pension plans to drive forward the level of returns and the cost savings. You've seen this slide before. I'll go quickly through it. It names out 3 different consultants, 2 different third-party managers, 2 different actuaries, 3 different law firms, and lays out the total investment administrative expenses. What we did here is just as those 3 neighbors in the 3 houses did, we just said, hey, who's getting the best price? We looked at the numbers on slide 5 and we said, okay, if you take the best price from each one of these and lay them out without rebidding, without renegotiating, without asking for price breaks, if you'll see here, you just get a savings of $2.4 million without trying to drive down the market price. In administrative costs, if we take the lowest administrative cost and spread it across all 3 funds, you save roughly $1 million a year. Investment costs, if you save investment, you take the lowest level of investment cost given a particular fund class, spread that across, lower by $1.6 million, total of $2.4 million a year, multiplied by that by 10 years. Now you see real value in having the same set of providers work on all 3 plans. So we've been asked to bring forward a few examples for the body to talk about. And so for the city of Atlanta, it's kind of hard to have a lot of examples because we were one of the first. If you recall, and the mayor tells the story well, when he talked about taking on pension reform to other major city mayors, they hung up the phone with him and told him he'd only be in office a short period of time if he took that on. What he realized is that pension reform was the entire thing, that if we didn't take care of the cost structure around pensions, nothing else would matter. It would crowd out everything else. So we went back and looked at some case studies around what other people have done and how they've consolidated and changed things around. So we went to Illinois, the public safety pension consolidation. It covered the police and fire pensions for police for that area. And if you looked at the operating costs, roughly $1,400 for firefighters, $1,300 for police officers, and $400 for municipal participants. If you drive all those costs down to the lowest common denominator, you end up with a 74% reduction. Simplistic, but also an example of what we're trying to do here. Same thing in Massachusetts. If you look at the cost savings there, where you drop from 51, you go from $971 per member to $51 a member. You see a 94% reduction in cost. These are just some bulk discount pricing types of examples that are based in actual occurrences out there. So the notion that, oh, we won't save much money, I think we can dispel that fairly quickly with some very, very basic back of the envelope types of analysis. So back to this notion of performance management. What we're trying to do here is look for the best and brightest minds who do this on a day-to-day basis to come in and help bring in some independent eyes on this, to train around basic financial competencies. What's happened is everybody looks at the returns when they're great. I say that there needs to be a lot of training around other major factors and their technical factors like Sharpe's ratios and standard deviations, et cetera, et cetera. These will give you a better picture without boring everyone to death here as to the overall stability of the fund and where there's opportunities to move forward. Key training and staff support is part of this proposal, as well as the subcommittees around governance and audit that allow the involvement of all of these, the firefighters, the police, and general employees into the decisions of the pension plans, but kind of looking at this investment of $3 billion plus in assets at a holistic level to drive down cost. So what's happened recently in this space, I wanted to give you some examples. Dallas is one that's come up recently. 11 trustees, 6 appointed by the mayor, 1 police, 1 fire, 3 by a nomination committee. So once again, the mayor having a majority of appointments. All of the trustees there have to demonstrate financial, accounting, business, investment, budget, real estate, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a consolidated governance around a police and fire system. So I wanted to kind of reiterate the value proposition that I said before. Lower administrative costs, 20% reduction, $2.4 million, 10% investment in reduction in investment management cost, and I think that may be conservative, $2.9 million, and 1% performance in the overall investment. Now, once again, I want to get to this point of will 11% turn into 12%, turn into 13%? Maybe, maybe not. But what it will do if we have a optimized portfolio, you're looking at smoothing out the highs and the lows so that your overall performance increases by 1%. What's 1%? $32 million. So I've broken out here on this slide the various funds and what that 1% would equate to. Let's just say we're off by half. I still say that $16 million is significant dollars to stay into, reinvest, and grow for future benefits. So what we've talked about and continue to talk about is bringing together 3 pension boards and the 1 investment board, lowering the cost of savings, implement best practices, and maintain the funds separately from an accounting standpoint. So at any given time, the police would know what part of the overall corpus was theirs. The same with fire, the same with general. This notion of commingling, that's just not something that we want to do or could do. We've heard a lot about, oh, this is going to change something. We've stressed again and again, what this will not do is it will not affect the paychecks or retirement checks of the plan participants. It does not commingle the three funds. Each one is maintained separately. And what it won't do is change representation from participants. There will still be an opportunity for active and retired representation on each of the boards. So what are the impacts? For the stakeholders, improve returns, lower cost. For the trustees, governance responsibilities around return generation, asset allocation models, managing risk will be supplemented by additional members that have expertise in this area. Access to available best-in-class managers who may or may not take a single mandate, may take a mandate from a larger fund at a lower cost. And then to align expertise and experience of individual trustees. So investments handled by trustees that have levels of investment expertise, and those who are doing the administrative kind of roles that have understanding of the ins and outs of the individual departments, what has happened and what the history is, they will still be able to participate at that level. For plan participants, greater transparency, one board meeting, one general board meeting to go to, confidence in performance based on having a level of expertise, basically having the world-class people coming in and helping invest. And then once again, this notion of we're changing a benefit is not there. There's no impact on their paychecks, et cetera, et cetera. That concludes my prepared comments, and I'll stand by to answer any questions or respond.
All right, well, let's do this. Let's go back to Ken Allen, who agreed to defer.
Thank you, Councilmember Shuck, and the rest of the council for listening to me again. I had a different approach on where I was going to be minutes ago. And something hit me when CFO Beard was speaking, which seems to be a very simple solution to what we're talking about. The current boards are set up by how? Mayor, appointee, CFO, and the elected officials and the council member, correct? Why wouldn't we hire somebody that has all the expertise that they're talking about for the city of Atlanta that can do this full time and that become the mayoral, whoever he or she is, appointee? To me, that is an absolutely simplistic idea of utilizing and putting something forward that has the expertise that we're talking about, and that gives us an opportunity to take a look and see what this would actually resolve. It makes no sense to me for us going through all of these changes when what we've admitted to just moments ago is that Mr. Beard didn't have the expertise, specialty, to be able to generate the returns that they're saying where shortcomings are. I have been in the pension board meetings and have not ever once seen our pension board and Mr. Beard clash on their decision-making processes. I think that he's been, and besides my disagreements with Mr. Beard on many points, I believe that he has done a very good job in advising them. But if he feels he has those shortcomings, then why didn't we, between the time frame of 2014 and now, simply create a position within this administration that would have brought those expertise things forward? I'm dumbfounded. I'm nothing but a union rep and a 30-year retired police officer, and that seemed to be the answer that would have caused results, at least some facet of the results that we were looking for now, to be able to see if this next step was the one to take. Very simple to me. Like I said, I've got notes. I was confrontational on some of the things going on, but I'm going to skip the portion of that to say that you council members need to hold this back to think about that simple fact, not move this forward, to take a look at that type of resolve for what this problem is and what that brings to the table.
That's a great suggestion. The problem is you have three boards, so you end up with three different investment officers. That's why you have one board to pick one person. So you made my point for me, and I thank you very much.
No, I didn't make your point. That's a nice spin on that.
So the city makes one decision on one CFO as opposed to each council district making a CFO decision. So thank you very much. You made my...
Again, are you going to let me speak again, or are you going to continue to talk over me? Because this is when we're probably started towards the debate.
We start that as soon as you walked up to the podium, sir.
You know, and I'm sure it's there. What I'm saying is the expertise is the one that is the choice of the mayor. and our board structure doesn't change. There's not a reason to.
Well,
because
sir,
the board structures are in.
my being here is not only the mayor. The mayor selects me, and these ladies and gentlemen confirm me. So, once again, apples and kumquats. One board could then make a decision to hire one chief investment officer if that's what they chose to do.
But again, if that's what we're doing with this, it's showing that it's not working. It's showing that it's not working if that's what they just said. And thank you for making my point, Mr. Baird. This point, it's not working on that part if that's what we're saying. It makes no sense in the conversation of what we're talking about. He's saying he doesn't have the expertise to do it, but now we're going to send a certain other person. A single board's going to have that expertise, and it's going to override what's happening with the additional boards. Again, that makes no sense. There seems to be a part of it, and if we're going to go controversial, then I'll bounce back to the rest of the points to show some of the shortcomings that they presented. I simply wanted to come in and try to make this an easier selection of what we were going to do and have an idea for council to take a look just at a thought process of that. If we're saying that was not correct or that we didn't have the knowledge that we should have had on that board, why aren't we doing something to put that knowledge in place within the structure of what it is instead of continually change what we have going on? The structure and the legislation that Councilwoman Adrian, that you brought forward still does nothing but allows for the mayor and the majority of people to be in charge, which again is what has caused the problems and certainly some of the problems with the department and the employees because of the history of corruption when that was the structure. And that particular part of it, and again, was brought up when I was told that I was a liar and didn't believe that. And fortunately, Ms. Shahar's here, still waiting for that public apology if you're ready to issue that, for the point of what we had said. That is what a big part of the problem with the employees and the consideration of what is happening here, their fears. They say it's not going to change anything, but it could down the road. And it certainly makes them worried about what their pension and things are because there's been nothing done to really prove that this section of this idea will work. I said before, we could put a model together for a year and find out what's going to go on and whether or not it would work. That is something that should be looked at. If that is the part of it, you'll stand up here and not have a one of us that are going to sit here and go, oh, what's going to be the fact? If they can prove, in fact, all of these assumptions are accurate and work, then those assumptions have to be accepted by this board, whether we as the members don't want it or not, because that's what's fiduciary responsible. But it hasn't been proven to you yet. It's been assumptions. As Lou Arcangeli said, coulda, shoulda, woulda. May, possible, those type of things are what's in this work. Nothing has been proven. Nobody put a model up. I was part of that commission as well in 2014. That commission brought this up, as CFO Beard said, it was brought up then, but they did nothing as the administration to put it together to prove their thought process would be effective today and would be effective in the future.
Let me make a few comments. First of all, I can guarantee you that all of the comments we've heard are being digested and thought through very carefully, and I for one, think they're really helpful. So, and if this was like a done deal or something like that, well, it'd already be done. I think I've learned a lot by listening to people like Mr. Arcangeli and others, and Mr. Strachan, and it's clear, and no one's ever said to the contrary, that there are people on your boards who have done and are doing really good work. And no one's ever said that the work is flawed. No one's ever said the results haven't been good. The question simply is, are we leaving money on the table that could be better deployed? I mean, that's what it's about. You know, I'm very grateful to Lou for shining a light on what happened back in whenever it was, 1991, which has become kind of an urban legend. I can now see very plainly that that was not an administration looting the pension fund, but two employees colluding to commit a criminal act. So I'm glad that that got put out there on the table. You know, and when I hear, well, we haven't proved this, we haven't proved that, this isn't a court of law, but we are going to make decisions ultimately based on a preponderance of the evidence. Well, and speaking of court, I mean, I'll ask a rhetorical question to follow up on a line of questions that Ms. Pagnotta very skillfully brought out. Let me ask, how'd that pension lawsuit work out for y'all? That was a utter disaster.
Turned out to be a decision, but
it
again,
got in the way of pay raises for you guys for years. So, yeah, you can find a lawyer. You can get Dewey, Fleeson, and Howe to say, sure, I'll take your money. Here, let me cite all of this code, and we'll go sue. I pray that doesn't happen again, but, different people are going to have different points of view on it. So just for me personally, I want to continue to think this through. I want to continue to talk with you guys, and Ms. Pagnotta's right. We're going to quickly have to sort of go from this to more, personal conversations that aren't, because I've got some questions I'm dying to ask, but, I just don't think I'm going to get a good answer out here in this setting where things can tend to be a little combative. And let me say, I think council deserves credit for admitting we're not happy with what we contribute at all. At all. That's got to change. And so that's one of the things I like about this plan is we're admitting we consume a lot more than we eat as part of the current bargain, and that's got to stop. So I'll be done. Does anyone else have other comments? Miss Adrian?
I just wanted to ask someone from the law department to help us out with the procedural questions that Mr. Strachan brought up in Section 3-507 that talks about some of the steps that are required for modification to the pension plan.
Sure. Kristen Denny is City Law Department. Good news, I'm getting my voice back. Hopefully I don't chase it away. So 3-507 is in the charter. It sets out the requirements that have to be in place before a final vote is taken. So the actuarial investigation and the report from the city attorney and the report from the CFO have to be provided to council before a final vote can be taken. Obviously, that we're not at that juncture yet, so those things are not technically missing at this point. The recommendation piece has changed over time. It used to look different. The way it currently reads is that a request for a non-binding recommendation has to be sent to the pension boards within 45 days of the introduction of the legislation. So I don't believe that has not been complied with either.
Okay, so we have 3 actuaries, and we're rapidly running out of legislative cycle time. So how long would it take for those 3 actuaries to make an opinion so we can have that step achieved?
That is, sure, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Robin Shahar from the Law Department. An actuary would already be looking at the situation, but back in 2011, because this was an evolving process on the floor, given the magnitude of the legislation, we actually had an actuary present at the time and the city attorney present at the time so that we could produce, based on the current changes at that moment, what was needed for under the charter for passage of the legislation.
Well, this says that the proposed modification has to have a written actuarial report. And since we don't have a recommendation, right, we're in draft form. Where are you, Miss? There you are. Since we're in draft form, we don't have a proposed modification. And it says from such actuary. I'm reading this out of context. Does it mean the plan's actuary or any actuary?
And Mr. Baird, I'm going to look at you. Have you spoken? Yeah.
So I was just we are looking for a third-party actuary to make this assessment so that it's independent of the actuaries that we have now. There was a short list of, I want to say, 3 or 4, and we were making a pick from that. I was trying to get an answer for you on the fly. Based on what we are talking about changing, which is a governance change and not a assumption change, I do not believe that that will be a long process to get the report that's required. But I'm in the process of trying to track that down as we speak.
Well, I agree with you that it's a structural change that shouldn't affect the actuarial assumptions and so on and so forth. But, our procurement code and our rate at which we move, and next week's Thanksgiving and everything, I'm a little nervous about how you all think you're going to move this timeline. So help me out here. You're not making this easy. Somebody?
Hi, thank you, Ms. Adrian. We knew that in this conversation today that would have been an issue. However, to Jim's point, they were trying to get someone independent, different from Siegel and the other company that represent the current pension board. Those I think there were 2 or 3 names, companies, and they do have the information if my memory serves me properly. And so what we would have anticipated, and we know that there's one more cycle, that if you didn't have it by Monday, assuming this, the conversation could have gone different, it could have passed on condition, but we were definitely planning to have that before Thanksgiving. So as of now, based on what you said, we know that we would have it by next week, but definitely before the next committee cycle, and then we could just play, play it by ear based on that. But to Jim's point, that has been a part of our ongoing conversations, but we definitely wanted it to be separate and independent.
And because of the size of this, procurement shouldn't be a threshold issue. This would be a one-off procurement for a service, and I can't see it being anywhere close to $20,000, ma'am.
Okay. And I just want to ask a quick financial statement or financial question, then I want to jump into a couple of recommendations that I'd like to see how the unions and my colleagues feel about them. But on the pension fund investment returns, in 2015 and 16, things went really somewhere between flat and terrible. Or do you all agree with these results for 15 and 16? What happened here?
I mean, they're audited results, so there's...
So, I mean, you want to give it a shot, Doug?
We can come back with that information. We have, and actually much of it is online. We've taken a GEF and put it all online. If you go to atlantagA.gov/general pension, you can look at all the years of reports. So I'm not casting any aspersions. I just would have to compare those reports for those years with this information.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but, when we're talking about how hard you all worked and how successful you've been, I just want to point out, I just want to understand, actually, why in 15 and 16 we didn't do so well, because I thought the stock market did. Help me out. Wasn't the stock market really good in those years?
It was. It wasn't that it was great. So there's a couple factors, and now we're starting to get technical. What's happened here is the standard deviation of their returns. They're not being very good at what's called downside avoidance. So because of the nature of their investments, they have what's called a high Sharps ratio. A low Sharps ratio, which means that.
In plain English, you're just saying they played it safe.
No, I'm saying the opposite. It was a risk-on trade, and what happens in a down market, you take a little bit more downside than the up market. It's a stylistic discussion. It is not a negative knock. It's just data, right? So we can drill into the data and run back to 2005, and we can calculate what the Sharps ratio is. We can calculate what beta and alpha are. We can show downside risk. But I'm sure Doug can go through this and all of the all of the actuaries can go through it and show where we are and how we got here. I don't see this as those particular years is indicative of something negative that the boards did. It's one of those things where not having full expertise and watching it consistently may have left money on the table or taken money off the table during the downside.
Well, Mr. Beard, do you know what the experience of other pension plans were in 2015 and 16? Did they all look like this?
I won't say all, but most were in that rough realm. Our plan was not an outlier per se. There were other funds that are in a, what I'll say, less aggressive posture that didn't take as much downside.
Can I add, Ms. Adrian, that we have an actuarial target that are similar to most, between 7 and 8%. Mr. Beard, 7.25, 7.5 right now.
Well, no, we're talking about actual target. We're talking about
I understand
return versus
our 5-year geometric average is where it's supposed to be, and you'll see. Then we're not tactically investing. We're investing strategically, and the most important thing is the asset allocation. And we have some of the best investment consultant resources that you can get. We have a third passively managed index fund, so we're getting what the market gets. And then in areas that are where it's appropriate in less efficient markets, then we have some active exposure. 2/3 of it is active, and we have superior investment managers in those active spaces as well. So a lot of the variability we have is going to be market driven.
Yeah, Mr. Wan just showed me a slide showing that those 2 years were flat in the market. So I want to jump into some compromises that might be of interest to you all.
Adrian, real quick, we also have Mr. Beard, that's expertise on there, and he helped make those votes. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. I understand that. So, colleagues, I just had some things I wanted to throw out on the table that might help us meet in the middle with the people who have been so highly invested and worked so hard on these funds. One of the things that occurred to me is that we really don't have any representation of any non-union members. And so if we added some non-union members, that would help balance out the board structure between those people who more directly represent the taxpayers. And then the other thing is that a lot of you who have been on the board for many, many years and have gotten the education and have performed ably, that there should be some sort of language recognizing that. Also, I don't know if you're thinking that there's going to be some sort of wholesale change on January 1st. Obviously, you all are in the middle of terms and so on, so there should be some clear language that your terms would be fulfilled. And let me see, just 1 minute. I think those were the points I wanted to make, because I did look again, and Mr. Strachan had a metrics as to how to appoint board members, which were all elected by union members, or I'm sorry, but let me finish my sentence. But we do need to have a balance between employees, union and non-union, the school board, of course, and we've all agreed to cut back on city council members. Maybe we just have one. Maybe it's just the FEC chair. But there needs to be a balance between those that are representing taxpayers and those that are representing the union. We've got to recognize the people who are serving ably, recognize the training and expertise they have. If someone else that's put forward by the union needs more training, so be it. That can happen. And so I'm just hoping that a few of those comments will help bridge the gap.
Just to clarify, if it's okay, the representation now that you have on GEF is roughly 10. You have 2 active employees represented that are elected from active employees, 1 retired person that's elected from the retiree population. So there's 3 that are elected. And then you have 2 that are elected from APS, because we're combined with APS. So one's active, one's retired. That's 5. You have 2 ex officio. You have the mayor, usually as proxy as Ms. Yancey. You have the CFO. And then you have 1 appointee from City Council. That's currently Mr. Bond. And you have 1 from Atlanta Public Schools. So it's 10 members. With police and fire, I believe that it's both 6. Is that correct? 6? Yeah. And it's roughly half and half.
Right.
They have 2. And so the concern, personally, that I had is that if you had the way it's you have the legislation the way it's currently written, you have 4 people that are elected. And probably in no case will they ever be able to be the prophylaxis that they're intended to be relative to any large moves of money, because they'll never be able to outvote.
Right. And I'm listening to you, and I've written down very carefully everyone's comments, and so there aren't 4 council members. We're suggesting 2, and possibly we can drop it down to 1, just being the finance chair. And this is just for the investment board, because there are other boards. And I agree with you, and I hear you loud and clear. I mean, I did the research on attendance. I agree with you that having council members has not been helpful. But having the CFO should be on. The HR person, I don't think you would be opposed to having an actuarial person. That's not a mayor person. And I don't want to argue point by point. I'm just trying to put some things out to my colleagues to consider. And I don't think that we need 2 of each, police, fire, and general, on the investment board. I think 1 each is fine. And then, but what we don't have are people who are non-union employees. They're not represented, and that's a mistake on my part. When I was looking at this thing to redo it, it was a mistake. And y'all said very emphatically that you didn't want a huge board, and that's why the original legislation, I think, was 15 or more. We cut it down to 11, and so what I'm trying to do here is trim it here and there to keep it tight, but also make sure there's a lot of representation. So if you add a couple non-union people, it ups the employee component to 6. The actuary is not elected, is not an employee, so it's a neutral person. The chair, the investment advisor, is not an elected person. So there's a balance in the board, and I just would like you to try to recognize that.
May I make a statement? I think you're misunderstanding, and let me make this clear. I'm not on the board as a union person. There are no union people on the pension board. I was voted in by the city of Atlanta, everybody that gets a paycheck. So I'm not representing the pension board as a union. When I came here to speak to you today, I made a disclaimer, which I said, if you were listening to me with due respect in the beginning, that I didn't want to make statements as the board. I was making a statement and making my public announcement for the members of the union that I reached out to and asked them what their input was, as I cannot reach out to every employee in the city. That's what I said. So me being on the board, I was not elected as a union. I was not just the union people that voted on me. If you go back and look, the elections went out citywide. And I got all the votes more than anybody on both elections from the city of Atlanta, over 7, the general fund of general population, not sworn. So nothing about unions is involved on the pension board. So I just want to make that clear. There are no seat on my pension board for a union elected person. I'm there as a city employee that was elected by all of the general employees that had an opportunity to vote.
Yes, but Ms. Pagnotti, the legislation that exists today says that there's a representative for the police, there's a representative for fire, there's a representative for general, and there's a representative for Board of Education.
Are you talking about for the pension board? There's a representative for the general, not union. Does it say union? It says representative. Union representative is 2 different things.
Okay. I take that point.
Okay, thank you.
But it's just, but the person is labeled as coming from those pools.
No. May I? I wanted to respond to Ms. Adrian's to Ms. Adrian's ask about the positions, and just listening to what she was suggesting from the administration's perspective, once everything is before you all, we definitely are open and receptive to some aspect of what is being proposed. That is my comment on behalf of the administration.
Okay, I appreciate
I'm
that.
taking my hat off, and I'm speaking to you all as a participant of the plan. And I am asking you to consider this legislation once it is complete, because what has happened today is evident that the governance of the pension boards needs to be addressed. This is a dual pot. This is the money that we put in as pension participants, but the other part, to keep it going, belongs to the taxpayers of Atlanta. And I appreciate your diligence in listening to this and going through this, but I believe that it is very clear that in some form or in some fashion, and as quickly as possible, we need to address the governance of this pension board. And I'll be back for if you need something from the administration.
All right. Mr. Strachan, go ahead.
Just as a final thought, it's clear, as you brought out earlier, that there's a lot of emotions and a lot of different thoughts, and you don't want to say all those things in this setting. You want to be able to take time to chew it over and really think about it. I like to see quick action too when there's opportunity to add value, but I don't want to do it at the expense of a mistake that's going to take us in the wrong direction. With due respect to law, they did comply with the code section I mentioned earlier. They sent a request, and they asked for the response of our board at the next meeting. While they technically complied and sent it, the request is not perfunctory. They wanted an answer. To be able to provide the answer after you've already enacted the legislation, I don't think is in the spirit of the requirement. And that's just my last request, is that from what my understanding, I've been with the city a long time, but I'm not really sure exactly how all of this works. From talking to your colleagues over there, I understand that if you pass this unanimously today, it'll go on consent decree for Monday. That's not true?
We're not going to vote on this today.
Okay. So we appreciate you, and we're willing. Personally, I am, and I think there are other board members. When you get past all the emotion, again, we want the same thing, and we're willing to work with you as we did before. It's one of the things that makes Atlanta great, is people are willing to come together for the best interests of all the stakeholders. Thanks.
Yeah, I sense it's worth further discussion, but the kind of the format's got to change a little bit, and maybe I'm going to be wrong. But before,
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah, sure. Of course, go ahead.
All right. All I want to say is that Katrina Park says she took off her hat to be a participant that's in there. I represent a whole bunch of other guys that are the same, that are not union members, that are retirees, that have contacted me and asked me to speak on their behalf, as well as other people that are not union members but are members of the Atlanta Police Department. So if you want a real feedback from employees on it, put something out for a survey. Put something out that's going to give the rest of them on how they feel about the governance of what's going on with this and their concerns about what would happen if they do put a super board together.
I understand. Process question. Go ahead, Ms. Moore.
I just wanted to make a comment. I wasn't able to attend the work session. I did watch, I think maybe about 50 to 60% of it in and out. And it's clear to me that, and I just want to go back, because, being one that was a part of the overall pension reform piece, and one of the pieces that made it work at the end of the day wasn't all about when we got to the negotiating table in the mayor's office or the decision that we made on the council floor. It was the conversations that were had, smaller group conversations I had with the unions, with all of the pension boards represented. I mean, all of them they were emotional meetings. Some of them, were really contentious, but eventually you worked through it, and then you came out with something, and then you had something to work with. And I just think the way we're going about this now, the reason why you've got such high emotions is because people feel similar to what I remember then, that something's being done to them, not for them or with them. And this issue shouldn't be in this posture, because when we had the pension reform, we talked about a governance structure that would be singular. So that concept, I don't think, is anything that people are screaming about. I think that they're feeling anxious because they feel that something's going to be done to them and they're not going to have an opportunity to have adequate input. So I don't know in this time frame whether it's, obviously we're going to hold it now because all of the I's haven't been dotted and the T's haven't been crossed. I'm just not sure that between now and the last council meeting of this year that we're going to have those kind of discussions so that we can have people come to the mic and let's discuss the merits of different pieces of it and make amendments that make it work. I just think that this manner is not going to produce a good product in the way that we're doing it. It's not what we're trying to accomplish, it's how we're trying to accomplish it. So I would just urge everyone for us to slow it down, take it back, have some offline discussions with the parties that are involved in this, and see if we can come back with something that makes sense. Other than that, I can say now I'm not really willing to be one that forces this down somebody's throat without adequate discussion. I won't be a part of that.
I think we all agree. I mean, otherwise we'd have had an up or down vote on this a while back. Ms. Shahar, wait a minute. I'm going to recognize myself because there's a process question I keep putting off asking. There's a lot of confusion that we need to publicly clear up about our schedule. Do we or do we not have a set of committee meetings in December?
No.
Okay, I mean, I know the answer, but I think there's still some confusion about that. Here's my other question. Has a special call meeting been scheduled?
No.
It has not been scheduled. Finance has asked for one, I want to say December 13th, to take up, if you recall, I asked for a bond, so we'd be finalizing a set of bond documents. We have not received a response from the City Council President as I sit here right now.
And it was scheduled for the 13th, Mr. Shook, to your point, because the public schedule had that there were committee meetings the week of the 13th, and that has since been corrected. And so at that time, several weeks ago, that's when Finance and Law wanted to schedule that special called meeting. And that meeting was strictly about the bonds, nothing else. However, there's been subsequent conversations about other items that could or could not be added to that agenda if, in fact, a meeting is held. But that would be a decision from a procedural perspective that you all would have to make on the 4th if there would be anything else that would go on a special called meeting if scheduled.
So it's clear that we could have a special call meeting after what up until now, is the last scheduled. I mean, we can still conduct business beyond that date. In other words,
yes.
Committee papers, when do they die?
It happens, and Bonnie, she's probably watching and coming down, but what happens is that, I said, you all would have to take an action on the 4th to move any papers to the special called meetings agenda, and if it's not moved over there, everything would die. And we know that you could not introduce any ordinances or anything on that 13th. It would only have to be items that have already met the minimum requirements of being on an agenda, like if it's an ordinance, 2 reads, or having gone through some process.
Well, unless a charter's changed so that we can have a quorum of like 5 people, I think it's going to be a challenge to get people here. Now, I interrupted Ms. Shahar, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Moore, I remember those days fondly, actually, and appreciated how we all rolled up our sleeves. And I also recall very emotional meetings and want to be very clear about, I don't know that we've articulated it today, we have at previous meetings. Unlike the 2011 reform, the reform that is before all of you today does not in any way affect people's paychecks today or at retirement. So I just want to be very, very clear. There is no financial impact upon individual employees or retirees that will come out of this pending legislation.
Ms. Shahar, with all due respect, the meetings I were referring to were not meetings that you were involved in. I'm talking about when I got with the unions and employees so that we could get them at the table with people who were doing something to them, number one. Number two, I don't necessarily agree with your assertion that this doesn't have anything to do with their paychecks or their benefits. This is the pension board, and so you're talking about people who are going to be making decisions about investments, about how it operates, and so while I believe that that could have a direct impact on them, and so I think that they should be concerned, as they are, about how the governance is and that they have representation in those decisions as they have now. So I just disagree with you that it doesn't have anything to do with it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. If
Sure.
it didn't, if it didn't impact them in some way, they wouldn't be here.
So it actually opens up a great point for me to explain, which is, given that this is a defined benefit plan, the stopgap, the taxpayers are the stopgap. So regardless of how these pension investments do, the City of Atlanta owes its pensioners the defined benefit. It is defined by their length of service and their salary and the multiplier. It's locked in. In fact, that was part of what was talked about in 2011, is that people's retirement incomes earned to that point would not be reduced. And so to the extent that the pension funds are not performing as well as they might possibly, the pensioners are not at risk, but the taxpayers are.
Well, and I disagree with that, because I'm here to represent not only what happens with the employees and those that are in the plan, but also the taxpayers who would be on the hook. And so that's just as important. And the reason we had pension reform in the first place was because the taxpayers were on the hook. And we wanted to make sure that we had a plan that was sustainable and that was fundable. So while it may not be an immediate impact, if the citizens of the city cannot afford to stopgap it, then it will impact them. That was the whole scare tactic to get us to get to the pension reform. So I just disagree with your premise. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Adrian.
Just a logistics question brought to mind when Mr. Shook was talking about attendance at a special called meeting. Ms. Shahar, according to this section 3-507, we have to have a 2/3 vote of the members of council.
That's
to
correct.
Pass this, so we'd have to have 2/3 of our members show up at the special called meeting, correct?
And pass it.
And pass
it has to be approved by 2/3 of the total membership of the Atlanta City Council.
So it sounds like we should. Well, I won't finish my sentence.
Yeah, hang on.
On the special meeting issue, and I don't know, Mr. Beard, is there a specific timeline of the 13th for there to be something done with these bonds, which is what the meeting's initially for? There may be other issues added on, or is it something that can be done early? And the only reason I say that is because I don't know if that needs 2/3 or not, but what you're going to start doing is losing members, because officially after the first meeting, not to say that we couldn't have a special meeting, I think this, if we're going to do something, it needs to be sooner rather than later, because people will start taking vacations. People will be missing. I probably might be one of them. You know, the 13th is pretty close to travel time.
Yes, ma'am. So the bond, as all bond transactions, there's a calendar and a schedule. The bonds are scheduled to sell on the 12th for your approval on the 13th. So all of this lined up with the schedule, and the schedule was assumed based on public data that was out there, based on the meeting schedule. Based on what I've just heard, if we can move it up even a day or a few days, we'll do that. But there is a set schedule and a process around around the sale and the execution of bond documents, and it is a Herculean effort to move that stuff. And so I will do my part.
That one's not what needs the 2/3. It would be the pension one.
Yes, ma'am. That's a different.
Is that correct?
The bond transaction I'm speaking of is a regular transaction.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, that may make it. I'm just saying that if the pension stuff is
Right.
going to be at that meeting, you
Right.
might have an issue
Right.
of even having 2/3 in attendance.
Right. Thanks for your patience.
Ed Emerson, I represent the City of Atlanta Firefighters Legal Counsel. I'm at Morris, Manning & Martin Law Firm. You should have all received a legal letter that I sent the Law Department on Friday of last week. They should have received it on that day. We haven't received any response to that, but there were two kind of big items in there. One is, is this legal? Kind of piggybacking on the Morgan Lewis position here. But secondly, is the formalities been followed in Section 3-507, which we just were talking about the 2/3 vote. And I iterated in the letter, and I'll iterate it here again. The pension board for the firefighters have not received the request for a recommendation, non-binding recommendation as required by the city charter, and there hasn't been the actuarial report, again, as you've already noted. So just wanted to make that clarification because I think the general board may have received that recommendation, but the fire has not, and my understanding is police has not.
Okay, well. Mr. Beard.
They all were distributed the same day, so I'll follow up.
Okay. All right, I think we're probably done here for today. I'm going to commit to reaching out to those of you who want to talk to me in a different setting. The reason I'm somewhat optimistic is because when we were this far out from the budget, this council was as far apart as I've ever seen it. And we ended up, through a lot of hard work, a lot of listening, we ended up getting there. It was unanimous. So I may be wrong, but I'll have to be proved wrong. So is there anything else for the good of the order today? We've exhausted our list of items as well as ourselves, and so with that, I will declare adjournment. Thanks to everyone.